Denied at the border, disowned by the future king, and possibly left standing alone behind palace walls, Meghan Markle's journey to Dubai on February 4th, 2026, was not just a travel setback. It was a moment that would reverberate across royal circles, global media, and the carefully curated world she had been building since stepping back from senior duties. The late afternoon light spilled across the sleek glass walls of Dubai International Airport, casting elongated reflections across the polished floors, a city of precision and controlled image. For a place where perception is currency and discretion is power, arrivals are usually choreographed to the finest detail. Yet, when Meghan stepped off her flight, the usual rhythm faltered. There were no flashing cameras, no chaotic throngs, just a quiet, measured air that hinted at the unusual, an almost imperceptible tension that would soon cascade into public spectacle. She moved with her usual composure, prepared for private meetings with luxury executives and a carefully planned dinner with regional investors. Elegance, discretion, and strategic positioning had been the hallmarks of the visit. But within minutes, the ordinary began to unravel. Approaching immigration, her documents were reviewed with brief glances and quiet exchanges, culminating in a polite request to step aside. Standard procedure, officials would later claim, but the atmosphere shifted from routine to restrained, a subtle alteration that suggested more than just bureaucracy. Within the hour, the decision was delivered. She would not be admitted. No headlines, no confrontation, just a quiet directive to return on the next available flight. For most travelers, this would be inconsequential. For Meghan Markle, the implications were seismic. Diplomacy, financial influence, and the fragile architecture of global perception collided in a single, quiet moment. Her team attempted clarification, referencing her marriage to Prince Harry and her extended royal status, but in Dubai, verification trumps symbolism. Titles without institutional backing are meaningless. Confirmation from London arrived swiftly, and it was not supportive. The palace had drawn a line, a boundary that clarified her status with precise finality. This was not mere rejection. It was structural disengagement, a public recalibration of royal influence. The city that thrives on predictability and control responded not to scandal but to uncertainty, assessing reputational exposure, weighing risk, and acting with preemptive discretion. By the time she returned through the terminal, no spectacle had occurred, but the ripples extended far beyond airport walls. Less than 24 hours later, Buckingham Palace issued a statement that was brief, clinical, and unmistakably final. Prince William, the future king, delivered a message that carried authority and finality. Meghan Markle would no longer represent the crown in any capacity. The language was unambiguous, devoid of qualifiers, signaling a permanent institutional severance. In modern royal history, such declarations are rare. Disagreements are usually managed quietly, internal fractures rarely becoming public. The explicitness of this communication transformed a logistical denial into a global rupture, one that would reshape strategic calculations, private alliances, and public perception. For months prior, concerns within the palace had reportedly been simmering, focused not on legality, but on the unauthorized commercial use of royal affiliation. The monarchy's survival hinges on perception, stability, continuity, and the appearance of neutrality, and even the slightest ambiguity poses risk. Dubai's procedural denial forced clarity, demanding institutional alignment, and the palace responded decisively. Behind the headlines, diplomacy unfolded quietly. Private correspondence reinforced the message, ensuring that neither Meghan nor Harry acted on behalf of the United Kingdom in any official capacity. The palace's decision was not reactive. It was preemptive, crafted to minimize exposure, while preserving institutional integrity. For Meghan, the implications were profound. Her global brand, carefully intertwined with residual royal influence, now faced the challenge of operating without symbolic or institutional endorsement. Investors recalibrated, partnerships stalled, and strategic alliances were quietly reassessed. Harry, for his part, remained silent. His restraint spoke volumes, a measured choice in a landscape where public statements can exacerbate volatility. Silence, in this context, became a strategy, a recognition that ambiguity could no longer shield or support the Sussex narrative. The Dubai incident did not create instability, it exposed it. Behind the smooth airport surfaces and controlled lights, months of underlying tension, strategic divergence, and professional recalibration converged into a singular, defining moment. Meghan's trajectory, built on forward motion, visibility, and reinvention, now encountered constraints imposed not by scandal, but by clarified authority. The palace statement had redrawn the boundaries, transforming procedural discretion into institutional verdict. Every partnership, every media initiative, every philanthropic engagement was now operating under this new framework, and the world, observers noted, adjusted accordingly. The fragile equilibrium between independence and institution had shifted, and the Sussex brand would need to generate its own gravity, entirely independent of royal adjacency. Dubai's quiet refusal, paired with London's formal statement, marked the end of a gray space where royal titles and personal ventures coexisted with ambiguity. Publicly, the moment was subtle, procedural, almost invisible. Privately, it was seismic, redefining influence, legitimacy, and strategic positioning. In the ensuing weeks, the effects would ripple through media circles, investment boards, and diplomatic channels. The narrative, once reactive to public curiosity, now demanded recalibration and forward-thinking strategy. Every action, every statement, every appearance would be measured against a new benchmark. Independence without institutional tethering, visibility without residual authority. For Meghan, the challenge was immediate. Pivot, adapt, and reconstruct a brand capable of commanding attention and influence without royal imprimatur. For Harry, the calculus remained delicate. Maintain stability, navigate strategic silence, and manage personal and public obligations in the absence of institutional reinforcement. Both faced divergent paths, each requiring reassessment of approach, strategy, and identity. The incident in Dubai was not an isolated inconvenience. It was a lens through which global observers could witness the intersection of personal ambition, institutional authority, and public perception. The palace's restraint contrasted with Meghan's historically proactive visibility, creating tension and strategic divergence, now laid bare in a moment that would define months to come. Diplomacy, finance, and public narrative converged in real time, illustrating that influence is contingent on recognition, institutional, governmental, and financial. Once withdrawn, the terrain shifts, and the Sussex narrative entered a new phase, one defined less by headlines and more by structural reality. Silence, procedural denial, and formal disengagement created a tableau of strategic recalibration, signaling that future initiatives would be scrutinized against clarified boundaries. Dubai did not humiliate, it clarified. The palace did not attack, it withdrew. And Harry's silence, deliberate and considered, underscored the seriousness of the recalibrated reality. The Sussex brand, once thriving in gray space, faced a challenge of reinvention, now entirely untethered from institutional support. Global perception, investor confidence, and diplomatic alignment would all need to be managed under this new paradigm, where influence depended on personal authority rather than inherited recognition. The recalibration was complete, procedural, institutional, personal, and strategic, leaving no ambiguity. Every future move would be measured, scrutinized, and interpreted within this new framework. The world observed, recalculated, and adjusted. Influence, once sustained by residual royal connection, now required deliberate reconstruction. Strategic partnerships, philanthropic endeavors, media presence, and public narrative would all need to navigate a landscape defined by clarified boundaries, procedural reality, and institutional withdrawal. Dubai was the spark, London, the structural clarification. Together, these moments crystallized the challenge. Independence, visibility, and influence would now operate without inherited legitimacy, demanding adaptation, strategic foresight, and careful recalibration in every subsequent endeavor. The quiet airport denial, The clinical palace statement and Harry's measured silence combined to create a scenario where perception, power, and influence were now entirely contingent on performance, strategy, and personal authority, marking a pivotal turning point in the Sussex narrative, one whose reverberations would shape the trajectory of their public and professional lives for years to come. The airport may have been quiet, but the undercurrents were anything but. Inside private rooms and behind glass walls, conversations unfolded that the public would never hear. Dubai officials, adhering to protocol, were meticulous in their review, yet observers noted an almost imperceptible tension, as if the room itself sensed the extraordinary implications of what was about to happen. Every glance, every pause, every exchange over documents carried weight. The very act of questioning her purpose, was it commercial, personal, or media-related, was a signal that Meghan Markle's status had become more than just ceremonial. It had become geopolitical. Each word, each gesture, reverberated not only in the airport but back to embassies, investors, and palace officials monitoring events from afar. It was an intricate dance of verification, protocol, and diplomacy that exposed the delicate interplay between celebrity influence and institutional authority. When the decision arrived, quiet but decisive, it was more than a denial of entry. It was an affirmation of boundaries, a reaffirmation that prestige and recognition are not permanent and must be continually verified. Meghan's team attempted to provide context, citing titles, past responsibilities, and associations, but Dubai's system operates on verification, not symbolism. Titles, without support from recognized institutions, carry no weight. Within hours, London's response was communicated clearly and formally. The palace would not provide diplomatic sponsorship. The words were precise, final, and devoid of ambiguity. The subtle power of this statement was staggering. For decades, the British monarchy had maintained authority through silence and restraint. Internal disagreements rarely became public. Yet here, in a rare inversion, silence would amplify and clarity would dominate. The message was unmistakable. Meghan Markle no longer represented the crown in any capacity, temporary or otherwise. This was not a personal attack. It was institutional recalibration, a defining moment in the interplay between public perception, reputation, and global influence. Observers in London and around the world recognized the significance immediately. Diplomatic channels that rarely disclosed details were suddenly alert, monitoring every ripple of consequence. Investors, philanthropists, and media executives recalibrated their expectations and strategies. A previously stable, predictable network of professional relationships and media partnerships faced new uncertainties, forcing reevaluation of potential risks and opportunities. The Dubai incident was the catalyst, but the deeper storm had been brewing for months. The Sussex brand, which had thrived on a hybrid model of residual royal association and independent celebrity, now confronted the challenge of legitimacy without institutional endorsement. Influence, long tied to a balance of perception and proximity to power, had shifted. The question was no longer whether Meghan could leverage her celebrity independently, but whether the structures that supported global influence, the subtle networks of recognition, access, and authority, would recalibrate favorably or collapse under uncertainty. For Prince Harry, the stakes were equally delicate. His identity, intertwined with the monarchy biologically, historically, and publicly, could not fully detach. His response, or deliberate silence, was itself a strategy, acknowledging the recalibration without inflaming further public attention. Silence, in this context, carried more weight than any statement could. It communicated measured restraint, loyalty, and awareness of a shifting environment. Every move following the Dubai incident would be interpreted against this backdrop of clarified boundaries. Harry's avoidance of commentary, his refusal to counter publicly, reinforced a cautious strategy. Avoid escalation, preserve private channels, and recalibrate influence behind the scenes. Meghan, by contrast, operated on a different rhythm. Her trajectory relied on visibility, reinvention, and strategic positioning. Stalling was antithetical to her approach. creating a tension between two public figures navigating a complex landscape of private recalibration, institutional withdrawal, and public expectation. Behind the headlines and viral clips, the operational consequences were immediate. Legal consultations, security considerations, staff adjustments, and strategic planning all require liquidity, stability, and predictability. A denial of entry in a major international hub, even without public drama, triggered cascading reassessments across multiple domains: legal, financial, and reputational. Partnerships that once seemed secure now faced evaluation. Investors assessed exposure, executives weighed potential risks, and media collaborators reconsidered prior commitments. The quiet procedural moment at Dubai had transformed into a fulcrum of global strategic recalibration. Observers who understood the mechanisms behind public influence recognized the subtlety and power of the palace's response. The declaration was not reactive, it was preemptive, ensuring that residual royal association would not be conflated with official representation. This clarified status created a ripple effect, reshaping perception and recalibrating influence. Public narrative, often fueled by headlines, now intersected with structural reality. Every public appearance, every interview, every professional initiative would be interpreted against this backdrop of clarified authority and withdrawn recognition. Influence, once sustained by hybrid status, now demanded independent validation. Dubai's refusal of entry, paired with London's formal declaration, created an environment where perception alone could not sustain access, authority, or engagement. Strategic recalibration became imperative. Every future initiative required consideration of legitimacy, verification, and independence. The Sussex brand faced the challenge of reconstructing influence in a landscape no longer supported by residual institutional authority. The incident revealed a central truth. Influence without formal recognition is contingent, fragile, and requires deliberate reconstruction. This lesson, hard-earned and globally observed, would shape subsequent decisions, strategies, and professional trajectories. Meghan's approach, historically proactive and visibility-driven, now confronted structural limits imposed by clarified authority. Harry's strategy, measured and restraint-based, illustrated the necessity of cautious navigation in a recalibrated environment. Together, these parallel approaches highlighted the tension between visibility and discretion, independence and association, celebrity and institutional authority. The world, watching closely, recalculated expectations. Every partnership, engagement, and media collaboration would now be filtered through this lens of structural clarity. The recalibration was not instantaneous, but the implications were clear. Operational, reputational, and strategic dynamics had shifted irreversibly. The hybrid model that had sustained the Sussex influence was under scrutiny. Recognition, influence, and access were no longer automatic. They were contingent upon performance, legitimacy, and strategic navigation. Dubai had been the spark, London the clarifying fire. Together, they crystallized a moment of transition, a pivot from ambiguity to structured reality, a shift that required deliberate adaptation, strategic foresight, and careful reconstruction. The consequences extended beyond public perception. Professional networks, philanthropic initiatives, media ventures, and global collaborations all required recalibration under this new paradigm. Silence, procedural denial, and formal disengagement combined to redefine influence, authority, and strategic positioning. The Sussex brand, operating previously in a gray zone of hybrid recognition, now confronted the challenge of legitimacy without institutional tethering. Global observers noted the shift immediately. Perception, long a key component of influence, now had to be actively maintained through strategic execution rather than inherited association. Every action would be measured against clarified boundaries, every decision scrutinized for legitimacy and impact. The recalibration had begun, and the stakes were immense. Dubai had not humiliated, it had clarified. London had not attacked, it had withdrawn. And in this quiet, measured realignment, the Sussex brand faced the complex task of reconstructing influence, authority, and relevance in a recalibrated global landscape.